In the early 1930s, survival didn't come from abundance, it came from ingenuity. There are stories of families stretching the smallest ingredients into meals that lasted days. One mother in the American plains could turn a single leftover chicken frame into a week's worth of soup, extracting every bit of flavor from bones, scraps, and vegetable ends. Nothing was wasted. Not a peel, not a crust, not even the cloudy broth at the bottom of the pot. Today, nutrition experts might look back and question the simplicity of those meals. But interestingly, modern research now confirms that many of those old habits like simmering bones for broth were incredibly rich in minerals and nutrients. What people once did out of necessity is now being rediscovered as health wisdom. During that era, soup wasn't just food, it was strategy. These meals were built for people who had very little. One pot, one heat source, and a constant need to stretch ingredients further than they should logically go. Yet, somehow, these recipes didn't just sustain life, they often tasted better than the processed foods lining shelves today. Take something as simple as water soup. It sounds almost unbelievable, but it was real. A pot of boiling water, maybe an onion if available, and whatever scraps were left in the kitchen: potato skins, wilted greens, or leftover bread. A slice of stale bread placed at the bottom of the bowl would soak up the broth, transforming it into something hearty enough to feel like a real meal. Then there was potato peel soup. Instead of discarding the skins, families saved them, simmering them slowly until they released starch and flavor, creating a surprisingly creamy texture. Even now, we know that many nutrients in potatoes sit just beneath the skin, meaning those families were unknowingly maximizing nutrition. And perhaps one of the simplest yet most clever dishes was early egg drop soup. With just hot water and a single egg poured slowly into the pot, it created delicate ribbons of protein, cheap, filling, and comforting. These meals weren't about luxury. They were about resilience, about turning almost nothing into something warm, satisfying, and deeply human. But this is just the beginning, because what comes next shows how even bread, something we take for granted, became one of the most powerful survival foods of that time. And wait until you see how something as basic as stale bread turned into meals people actually looked forward to. Bread during hard times wasn't just food, it was too valuable to waste. Even when it went stale, it found new life in the kitchen. One of the most common dishes was bread soup, where leftover slices were torn apart and simmered with water or milk until they softened into a thick, porridge-like meal. Sometimes, if available, a bit of butter or a beaten egg was added to enrich the flavor. Too many families, this wasn't a struggle. It was comfort. In certain communities, children grew up enjoying it so much that they didn't even realize it came from necessity. Another powerful example of resourcefulness was bean and bone soup. After a ham or roast was finished, the bone was never discarded. Instead, it became the centerpiece of a pot of soup, simmered for hours with beans and water. The slow cooking process released marrow and collagen, creating a rich, thick broth that could feed someone for days. Cabbage soup was another staple. Affordable, filling, and incredibly versatile. A single head of cabbage could stretch across multiple meals. Combined with onion, water, and sometimes tomatoes or grains, it created a dish that improved and flavored the longer it sat. Then came meals born directly out of desperation, like Hoover's stew. Named during a time of economic hardship, it was a mix of whatever was available: hot dogs, canned vegetables, and pasta thrown together into one pot. It wasn't elegant, but it was filling and dependable. Onion soup, in its simplest form, was another standout. Slowly cooking onions until they caramelized brought out a natural sweetness that transformed plain water into something surprisingly rich. No expensive ingredients, no complicated steps, just time and patience. Even tomato soup, which many now associate with canned versions, was originally made from scratch. A few tomatoes, a bit of butter, and a clever trick in baking soda to reduce acidity created a smoother, more balanced flavor. These recipes show something powerful. Flavor doesn't always come from expensive ingredients. Sometimes it comes from technique, time, and necessity. But what's even more fascinating is how flour, something so ordinary, was transformed into entire meals on its own. Because in the next part, you'll see how people turned simple flour and pantry basics into meals that defied logic. Flour was one of the most important staples during difficult times. It was cheap, accessible, and incredibly versatile. But what truly stands out is how people turned it into complete meals with almost nothing else. One forgotten dish involved making tiny dough crumbs by rubbing flour and egg together and dropping them into simmering liquid. These little bits cooked quickly, thickening the broth and turning it into something substantial. It was simply almost meditative to prepare and surprisingly satisfying. Split pea soup was another powerhouse. With just dried peas, water, and maybe a leftover bone, it created a thick, hearty meal that required no blending. The peas naturally broke down, forming a rich texture that felt far more filling than its ingredients suggested. Then there were wild ingredients like dandelion greens. What many people today consider weeds were once a valuable food source. Cooked with garlic and onion, they created a soup that was slightly bitter, but packed with nutrients. Potato soup stood above many others as a true staple. Just potatoes, onion, water, and a little milk or butter if available. The starch from the potatoes created a creamy texture without needing cream. It was simple, reliable, and deeply comforting. Corn chowder added a touch of natural sweetness. Corn, potatoes, and milk combined into a warm, rich dish that felt almost indulgent despite its low cost. And then there was mulligan, stew, a dish without rules. Everyone contributed whatever they had, and it all went into one pot. It wasn't about the recipe. It was about making something out of whatever was available. These meals prove that creativity often thrives under limitation. When options are few, people innovate in ways that feel almost lost today. But what comes next might surprise you even more, because some of the most powerful soups came from ingredients most people still throw away. And in the next part, you'll discover how overlooked scraps and unusual ingredients became some of the most nutritious meals ever made. Some of the most valuable ingredients during hard times were the ones people didn't want. Things like bones, feet, and scraps items often discarded became the foundation of deeply nourishing meals. Chicken foot soup is a perfect example. While many avoided it, those who used it understood its value. Slowly simmered, it released collagen and gelatin, creating a thick broth that supported joints and overall health. Today, this is praised in modern nutrition, but back then, it was simply common sense. Barley was another overlooked hero. Adding just a handful to any soup could transform it from a thin broth into something filling and satisfying. It absorbed flavor while adding texture, making even small portions feel like a complete meal. There was also a dish made from browned flour. By cooking flour in fat until it developed a nutty aroma, then adding water, families created a surprisingly rich, gravy-like soup. It sounds improbable, but it worked. Garlic broth was valued not just for flavor, but for its believed healing properties. With dozens of cloves simmered into water, it created a simple yet powerful dish, often used during illness. Even buttermilk found its place in soup, especially during hot months. Mixed with crumbled bread and seasoning, it created a cool, refreshing meal that required no cooking. Bone marrow soup took things even further. Roasting bones before simmering them extracted deep flavor and nutrients, creating a broth so rich it could stand alone as a meal. And then there was peanut butter soup, a dish that surprises many people. Combined with broth and simple vegetables, it created a creamy, protein-rich meal that felt both unusual and comforting. These recipes challenge modern assumptions about food. They show that value isn't always obvious, and sometimes the best nutrition comes from the least expected places. But the final part of this story isn't just about food, it's about something even more powerful. Because the last recipe isn't really a recipe at all, it's a lesson that might matter more today than ever before. At the heart of all these meals is one simple truth. Food was never just about eating. It was about connection, survival, and dignity. One of the most meaningful examples is something often called stone soup. Not the story, but the real-life version of it. During hard times, neighbors would each bring a small ingredient, an onion, a potato, maybe a bone, and combine them into one shared pot. Individually, those ingredients weren't enough. Together, they created a meal. That idea, community over scarcity, was just as important as the food itself. Another powerful dish was a simple potato and onion soup with a poached egg. In just minutes, it delivered protein, carbohydrates, and warmth in a single bowl. It wasn't complicated, but it was complete. Lentil soup offered another fast, affordable option. Cooking quickly and requiring no soaking, it became a go-to for families who couldn't afford long cooking times. Vegetable scrap broth may be one of the most practical habits of all, saving peels, ends, and stems, then simmering them into broth, turned waste into something valuable. It's a practice that still makes sense today. Chili bean soup added bold flavor to otherwise plain ingredients, proving that even a small amount of seasoning can completely transform a dish. And through all of these recipes, one thing remains clear. These weren't just meals. They were solutions. They were proof that even in the hardest conditions, people found ways to create comfort, warmth, and nourishment. Today, we live in a world of convenience, but many of these ideas still hold value, not just for saving money, but for understanding how little it really takes to make something meaningful. Because in the end, it wasn't just about stretching food, it was about stretching hope. So the real question is, which of these forgotten meals would you try first, and what might they teach you today?